Tonight, actually the guest host tonight is Dr. Moshe Lewis and Dr. John Kniff. Dr. Lewis and Dr. Kniff are my friends. They are true servants. These men have taken time from their busy schedule to come out tonight on the show and teach you things that your doctor doesn't have time to tell you about cardiovascular disease. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. John Kniff and our host tonight, Dr. Moshe Lewis.
Hi, my name is Dr. Moshe Lewis, and I'm delighted to serve as a host this evening for A Cup of Cold Water's program on cardiovascular disease, the silent killer. I am delighted to be joined by my colleague, Dr. John Kniff, who is a hospitalist at Stanford and also Washington Hospital. He also serves on the executive board of the Palo Alto Medical Foundation. And Dr. Kniff, welcome.
Thank you for having me here.
So tell us a little bit about just sort of what you do on a daily basis. What is a hospitalist and where do you work? What kinds of patients do you see?
What I tell people is you never want to see me because it means you're sick enough to be in the hospital. And if you ever see me, you never want to see me again. So I take care of people who have heart attacks or strokes, any bad infections, kind of things that are severe enough, just adults, not kids, to get you into the hospital.
Wow. So we started off saying that cardiovascular disease is a silent killer. What exactly does that mean?
Well, it's a couple things. It's a range. And the most concrete you can do it is, I remember the first person I ever saw die of a heart attack. And she didn't have chest pain. I asked her, I was a medical student, and
Wow.
then she said, well, no, I have a little chest pressure.
Oh.
Died that night. And it's really a gamut. It's the classic symptoms, you see on TV are not always there. Sometimes it can just be a little bit of heartburn, sometimes just sweating, and that can be the signs of a heart attack. And I think that's one aspect of the silent killer.
Sure. So is it true that women and maybe even people with diabetes have different symptoms than maybe older men?
They tend to present less classically. And when we say classically, it's like you've seen in the movies, somebody grabbing their chest, sweating, that's the classic. But women tend not to have chest pressure, tend to have just feeling poorly. And obviously the trouble with diabetics, and that woman I was talking about had bad diabetes, their nerves are not as good. And then they're not going to have that chest pain, all the classic symptoms. Sometimes they can just have sweating.
No, that's really good to point out. So here's a question that often comes up. What types of things should people do on a regular basis when they're seeing their doctor to try to be aware of their heart status or their
Sure.
heart health? And
then the other aspect of being a silent killer is that you get the disease over years and years.
Oh, okay.
You get the plaque buildup on your arteries. Now they're starting to see it even in kids. With the kind of poor diets kids have today, they're already getting the accumulation, the beginning of a heart attack, even in adolescence.
Right.
So it's when you go to your doctor, the absolute most important thing to do that you can modify is your blood pressure.
Okay.
That's if America could do one thing for its health, it would get its blood pressure under control.
So what exactly is blood pressure, and how does the average American get it under control? What should they do?
It's interesting. So your heart's a pump,
Okay.
right? And so it pumps out, and there's a certain pressure. When it pumps the heart, it has one blood pressure, and as it relaxes, it has another one. And those are those two numbers you commonly see, the high one, the low one.
Okay.
And that's what we call the systolic and the diastolic.
Okay.
And, we like to see your blood pressure 140 over 90, we're starting to push that down a little bit, 130 over 85. We don't want it higher than that.
Sure. So are there some natural approaches or natural things that people can do to try to keep their blood pressure, as you said, below 140 over 90?
Absolutely. Those are the easy ones. And unfortunately, a lot of you inherit blood pressure problems. And,
Right.
and if anybody out there has blood pressure problems, most likely you talk to your mom and dad, your uncles, your aunts, they all have it too. So it's not anybody's fault, it's not due to stress, but yes, certainly watching your salt intake for a lot of people will make a big difference.
So what are some subtle ways? I mean, I know when we were growing up, Mom said don't put a ton of salt on our food, but what are some subtle ways that salt is slipping into our diet that we may not see or be aware of?
Interestingly, we only get 6% of our salt intake from the salt shaker.
Okay.
And once you think about it, when you eat a Campbell's soup, anything, you feel how salty it is. It just tastes regular, but if you think about it, there's so much salt in it, and it's really a challenge to patients to be able to eat around the salt, because you'll look at every can, everything has salt added into it.
Wow.
But it's just a lot of it is basically stripping back the processed food, getting to the vegetables, cooking it yourself. I mean, the way to do it is think how your mother used to cook.
Right.
The odds are she cooked a very healthy way, and you don't.
Right, from scratch.
You don't.
Right.
And so she knows exactly how much salt's in it. None. Because she got the broccoli and she boiled it. And,
right.
There's not things to it, but, it takes a little more time, but at the end of the day, probably worth it.
Right. So it sounds like we're saying obviously cut back on salt, foods that are in cans, or there's some other high-ticket items that have a lot of salt in them?
As obviously the pre-cooked meats, the things that come in with a lot of salt. The regular meat wouldn't. Regular meat wouldn't. But as you get it, if they're already pre-cooked, a lot of times that salt's in there already.
So maybe like cold cuts,
things like
that.
hot dogs. They put a lot of salt in there. So it's just one of those things. It's on the package, but you have to get used to looking out for it.
Okay. And then what about exercise? What role should it play? How should somebody think about starting to exercise more?
Because again, that's the next best thing to do to get your blood pressure down, besides watching your salt intake, is exercising. So not even losing weight. Just, don't worry about losing weight. Just the exercising will help your blood pressure.
Will help it stabilize.
And the best thing to do is kind of get some trigger, to get yourself out walking for a half hour, 40 minutes. It does not have to be running, doesn't have to be anything too strenuous, but just getting out walking for a half hour, 45 minutes, 3-4 times a week is considered, and as bizarre as you may believe it, in this country that's considered exercise.
That's a lot. That's a lot. Sure.
It's not a lot,
yeah,
but it's in this country that's exercise.
Yeah, we were talking about before the show how important it is for people to get out of their cars, and we have become a very reliant society.
You'll laugh at yourself at how little you'll take a car for 2 blocks.
Right, exactly.
But you got to start walking it, and you got to get your family out walking with you.
Sure. So we're going to continue this conversation, but let's take a little break now and come back with Dr. Kniff. He has a lot of helpful information for us, and we'll be back in just a moment to ask him some more questions.